Why was 1983 the year for this? And I have my suspicions, but I want you guys to answer. I've already been wrong, drastically wrong about the book once per podcast. It's all my heart can take. Why 1983?
Wow.
What stories influenced this story?
I mean, obviously, all the late 70s and the early 80s were like truly the heyday for horror films, for this, before they just turned into just straight up slasher films, which I enjoy me a slasher film too. I'm not talking, it's just like there's less story once you get to the point where it's just like, cut this guy's face off or we'll blow your head off with a shotgun. I mean, compelling,
I believe I've seen all 7 of the Saw films. They're great.
And, for me, it was very much about an aesthetic, because by the time you get to 1984 and 85, all the vestiges of the 70s are gone. Really, you have really started to get into the very, like plasticine aesthetic of the 80s. It's like, it's very future, but it's also very plastic. And it does not have, like, the stories did not have the same feel by that point. And for me, when I was like, I want to write, a horror comedy, the comedy part is like, that's part of how we can get away with setting it in 1983. Because if we went in and said, we just want to write a horror book, for kids set in 1983, they're going to be like, why? And so I wanted to bring it back to like right before everything got like super high aesthetic in the 80s. When everything was still weird, knobby knees, and, a lot of the same aesthetic that Stephen King was pulling forth when he was doing Stand By Me and when he was doing It. Stephen King was a huge author for me at the time. And by the way, the very first time I babysat all by myself, I was 13 years old. And the book I took with me to read while I was babysitting on New Year's Eve was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And that was a choice. And I really wanted, for me, 1983 felt like the place where it's like, that's the point at which you are scared out of your mind and also don't know enough to explain it away. That's what I wanted 1983 for. Plus, Stranger Things was a thing.
True.
Made a good comp.
Fair enough. Makes sense. Josh, did you have any particular? I mean, obviously, Friday the 13th has to be an influence on Camp Sweetwater. That's the most obvious one. But were there other things specifically from the 80s or pre-80s that you're drawing inspiration from?
I mean, for me, no, because I've never seen any of those scary movies because I'm scared of them. But for me, like, I was born in 1976, so I feel like 1983, okay, I was 7. Like, I feel like that's the earliest, like, I don't really remember anything before that, you know what I mean? Like, you don't really remember too much. I remember a tiny bit, maybe about being 5 or 6, but 1983 is just like, that's just the beginning of, like, when I think about that's just when I was at camp, and that's when I was like, that's just my childhood. That's like the year of childhood for me is 1983, so just kind of that personal thing for me of just that year made sense. By 1984, yeah, I was like, not that I was older, but I was like, upper elementary school or whatever. I was like starting to, I think I just think 1983 was like, that just says childhood to me, being born in 76. So, but yeah, and I like everything from that era is just kind of funny to me. Like, yeah, like the high tube socks, like on the cover, I kept saying, make the socks higher, pull up those socks, more tube socks, like more short shorts, like just short shorts and tube socks. There's like a lot of like 80s tennis, like Bjorn Borg and John McEnroe, like just stuff I think is funny. Like, it's just funny to me. Music of the early 80s is funny to me. Like, just culturally, it's all amusing to me because I guess it's just because it's when I was discovering the world and it just seemed so you know, just my first awareness of the bigger world, and then it all seemed so important. And then, you know, some years later, looking back on it, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. So it's just, to me, it's just that personal perspective of like a real hate, like a real, it just is a sort of to me, just sort of an absurd time in fashion and in music and in everything. It's just kind of funny, but probably just because I was 7 years old at the time. Not for any, I'm sure any other period looks equally silly with that kind of lens, but to me, that's just why. So, is 1983 when
I was 10. I was 10 in 1983, and like I was super into like Zilpha Keatley Snyder, Mary Downing Hahn. I mean, I was just, oh man, the Dollhouse Murders. That book knocked my socks off. Like, I was like, yeah, that's my jam. And I really, for all of the grown-up stuff that we think about, you know, that time period, that was like 1983 was like, you know, when books and magic were the absolute most real. Like all of this stuff could possibly happen, you know?
Was that when Friday the 13th came out? Was that a 1983 film?
No, the first one was in 1979, and then there was one in 1982, and
so those are older. Okay.
Yeah, and the thing is that Nightmare on Elm Street is going to come out in 1984, and Nightmare on Elm Street changes everything on the horror scene, and so there's very much a, you know, you have the scary crap happening in the woods era, and then you get Freddy Krueger, and from Freddy Krueger then you get the Candyman, and you get Jacob's Ladder, and you know, it really changes what horror is in film up until you start to get to the 90s pure slasher aesthetic.
I've never seen any of the films. I've never seen a single one of them. I don't even know.
I feel as part of the research for Camp Murderface 3, you need to sit down and watch all of these. It's really the only way you could do it.
I think it would be hilarious to do like a watch through for just one of them. Just one, because I don't want to traumatize Josh forever.
Yeah,
no, you could live stream. You could live stream your reactions. It would be a great promotional event for the book. Make this happen.
Okay, I was gonna say I already spend enough on therapy. I don't need to like that pill. I'm not watching all the horror films in a row. I'll never get out from under that. But maybe if I could, that'd be. Yeah, there'll be a lot of this. The whole live stream will be this. It'll just be me hiding my.
But I want to hear what Rob's theory was on why we said it.
Yeah, that's why I want. That's why I wondered.
My theory was that it would be a personal time for one of you, or if not both of you, to reflect fondly, and also because of Friday the 13th, and it's a camp thriller. That was really the extent of my thoughts.
Oh, okay. So it was a lot of that, but also things.
Yes.
I have deep thoughts all week long. I keep both off the show. This is the free show. You don't get the deep thoughts for free.